That was inspirational. Next we have Philippa Whitford, an NHS consultant with some very interesting things to say, both in a positive sense going forward, and I suspect in terms of the potential consequences of a no vote in terms of public services in Scotland. On that note, to Philippa.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Andy for the invitation and all of you for shoehorning yourselves into this hall. It's absolutely incredible turnout. And that's what we've been finding if we're going to meetings and doing meetings. I've travelled over 1,200 miles in the last 7 weeks. And any of you who've seen my little YouTube video know how I landed doing that. And I've been in wet halls on a Monday night or in halls on a sunny Saturday afternoon. This thing's got life. Is someone filming this? Is this like camera? And I think that's because people are beginning to actually have to boil down to the decision they're going to make. In less than 3 months, we're going to go into a little booth and shut a curtain. And the only person in there with that pencil and that piece of paper is going to be you. There's not going to be anyone else talking to you. By then, you have to have worked it out. And I think people are really earnestly trying to do that. Some of us are clearly yes supporters. We know what we believe, and we're trying to work and share our ideas with other people. But some people are still struggling with that. And as has been mentioned already, we are not getting even coverage, unfortunately, in the mainstream media. While they can put out something and it's on banner headlines on all the papers, so people who just walk into RS McCall's, see in 3 inches, you'll all starve, there'll be no lights, you'll all fall into the sea every single day. We have to go round doorbell by meeting by meeting. That's what we're doing. And I have to say, while I've hardly been in my own home, and it's normally my hubby, the German one, who drives me round to meetings, I've really had a fantastic time. Meeting people of all walks, of all ages, who are absolutely engaged in this. And it really is thrilling. Now, I speak generally for Women for Independence. I'm a breast cancer surgeon, so I spend my life working with women, treating women, and we normally have little tables with cake. And I would have to say, you're missing out. Little tables with cake is definitely a good idea for any long meeting with lots of talking. And a cup of tea to wet your whistle. And the part of that is because, in my experience, women are the warp thread that holds society together. Now, I worked in Gaza and Lebanon with my husband for 2 years as volunteers, and I did quite a lot of work in developing health projects for women, which meant I got the chance to meet women in a room with only women, without veils or anything else, and they were just exactly like here. We didn't have Heat magazine, but the gossip, etc., was exactly the same. So while I saw that the men were the ones out making the noise and fighting for their nation, for their state, it was the women who were actually holding the society together. So that's part of my explanation of why men are more for yes. They've got the kilt on, the blue paint, the claymore, they're already over there, and the women are weighing things up and looking at things and trying to decide what is the best thing to do. But once women make that decision, believe me, they go for it, they go forward. And part of that is because they've not had access easily to information. They're having to make time and come out to meetings or go online and dig around. The things that women are interested in are all the things that are important to society. They want their children to be well, they want their children to be educated, they want their children to have a future. And like me, they don't want Skype grandchildren who are somewhere else because there was no choice. There was no decent living in Scotland, which is what we have now, which is something that I personally fear. My son is 20. He's absolutely mortified that I keep talking about my grandchildren. He doesn't even have a girlfriend. But, you know, you have to be prepared. But But one of the important things, obviously, for women is health. They're involved from children are getting their jags to their colds and flus and their appendix out and their broken arm when they fall off the trampoline, right through to looking after elderly relatives who are sick or ill. Women are embedded in that. The health service is largely delivered by women. So I work in that kind of an environment. And I was running women's cafes since the beginning of the year. When the date changed, people started to engage. But I only started talking about the NHS when Better Together had the cheek to say that if we voted yes, we'd be leaving the UK and leaving the NHS, and we'd have no NHS. And I'm sorry, I had to get up on my hind legs and argue that is a flat-out lie, and I couldn't be having that. The NHS in Scotland has been a separate organisation since its founding in 1948. It has never been under or part of or embedded in NHS England and Wales. NHS Northern Ireland was also separate. And Wales got their NHS devolved in 2006. So we've always been separate. But you wouldn't have known it because we worked together. If you came in and saw me and I needed to send you to London, I sent you to London. It was no issue at all. That started to change with Mrs. Thatcher because she set up things called trusts, where hospitals were meant to pretend they were businesses. And you will probably remember there was a time when whatever your local hospital was, it had trust in the name. Now since '99 and devolution, that has disappeared in Scotland. We got the opportunity to go back to being a single public delivered, public run, public funded organisation that cooperates right across Scotland. Our poor brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins that might become foreigners south of the border have had a much worse experience. It was the Labour Party who set up Foundation Trust, which was just a more extreme version of Mrs. Thatcher. They were the ones who brought in private providers for the first time. And the current coalition, in just 1 year, have managed to start pulling the NHS in England apart altogether. There's no longer strategic planning from above, looking at what size is our population, how many will have heart attacks, how much cancer will we need to treat. It's little groups of GPs who have to commission services, and they must put all services out to tender. And those services are tendered to NHS and private providers. Over £16.5 billion worth of contracts have gone to private providers in the first year. Now you might think that doesn't matter because at the moment you don't have to bring your checkbook or your credit card. And that's all well and good. But this system is costing a lot to administer, which is money not spent on patients. And these guys are not there for the good of their health or yours. They're there to make a profit. So that's another chunk of money that has to come out and go to the shareholders. So there's simply less money available at the coalface. But to me, one of the worst things that's happening because of it is they have lost all sense of collaboration and cooperation. In breast cancer, I was lucky enough to lead the setting of standards for all breast units in Scotland over 14 years ago, 2000. And we meet every year, we compare ourselves in audit, we criticise each other, we offer suggestions, we share what maybe helped us 2 years before, and work out how we can improve all the services. And they have improved over the last 10 years. I leave it to you to imagine whether Marks and Spencers and Debenhams are going to sit down and collaborate on how to provide a really good service for their customers. I don't think so. And that's exactly what's happening south of the border, is every single unit is competing with every other unit. So the NHS hospitals are competing with each other, and they're competing with private providers. That means management's energy is focused on that competition, because they only get paid for what they do. So if they miss a patient, or if they refer the patient somewhere else, because Joe Bloggs up the road is much better at that operation than I am, the money goes. So it's changed the whole complexion. And I have people from my year who work down south, my brother works down south, and things have just changed radically. The private providers pick the simple, easy, cheap, lucrative operations or treatments to give. Those are the ones you can really make a profit on. The NHS gets left with the complex stuff. So if you're hit by a bus, if you have a complex cancer, if you have a chronic illness, you're left with the NHS. And the fees may not actually cover your time in intensive care, your expensive chemotherapy. So the patients being treated in the NHS in England are proportionally more expensive. 1 year in to the reforms, 40% of all the trusts in England are in massive debt. It totals £330 million in 1 year of these changes. Now, any of you who've worked for any kind of anything will know how they're going to solve that. That's going to be cuts in staff and cuts in services. So, okay, we were lucky. We were devolved. We don't have that. So what's the issue? And that was the funny thing. Now they turned it around and threw it back and go, why aren't you making a fuss? You're a devolved organisation. But they control the purse strings. And until we get away from Westminster controlling the purse strings, we cannot guarantee to hang on to any policy. And I feel, just like Pat has said, Scotland would go in a different direction. We've already gone in a different direction in the first 15 years of devolution. We don't believe that the politics of other should rule our society. You know, you would help a friend, you would help your brother, you would help a neighbour, you might help a child who's struggling to read if it's your own nephew or your own child, you would help your mum move house. But if you create the politics of other, when someone needs help, we say, oh no, they're wasters, we don't help them, they're disabled, they should try harder. And that's what we have at the moment, is politics of other. And even our own Labour Party talking about something for nothing culture. It's not something for nothing culture, it's investing in your own citizens. I was lucky enough to benefit from free university education, and I would have had no possibility of going to university if I hadn't had that. I had no family support, and at £9,000 a year for 5 years, the tuition fees alone would be £45,000. Living fees at about £6,000 a year for halls and books, etc., and you're knocking on 80,000. There's no way as an 18-year-old with zero family behind me, I would have signed up to a loan the size of a small mortgage. So what about the talent that they're missing out on south of the border? And what about the talent we would miss out if we eventually were pushed that we didn't have that? Imagine if we vote no. So we go in there and we decide, no, we're not a country. We're just a region, and we'll stay a region. What do you think they're going to do? We know the Barnett formula has got a big painted target on its back. There's lots of them want rid of that. That takes over 4 billion out of our block grant. As Pat said, 25 billion worth of cuts have already been announced. Our share of that is 2.5 billion. At least half of that is going to come out of welfare. You're talking about taking nearly 7 billion out of our economy and out of our block grant. The NHS costs about 12. You can't cut that sort of money out and think that you won't notice. And if you were an MP down south, looking up our free dental checks, and our free eye checks, and our care for the elderly, and our no prescription charges, wouldn't you want to tackle that? And your child is paying £9,000 a year, and your constituents keep coming and moaning at you because they can't see their local GP, and the NHS isn't working very well. You'd look up here and say, these subsidy junkies up there, how come they've got everything so good? So the idea that the status quo is simply available to us, it isn't. And for a lot of people, while we may be sitting in here reasonably comfortable thinking, the status quo would do me fine, in Scotland as a whole, that just isn't the case. We still have appalling poverty. We know the link of poverty and education, the link of poverty and poor life choices, poor life chances. That's young people who end up on drugs, on drink, in trouble, because they have no future. the future I want, not just for my son and my imaginary grandchildren, but for all children in Scotland, would be that we don't create another generation who are doomed to failure.